Hey everybody, welcome to EIS Live once again. Welcome to my new backdrop, my new studio here. I'll let you figure out whether that's actually real or whether that's a green screen behind me. And you can just send in your comments and let me know what you think. But there it is nonetheless. So anyway, just want to let you know that EIS is here for you. We are a counseling, coaching, and mentoring entity that helps people find the freedom in their lives to become who they're intended to be, their why and their purpose, as opposed to, a traditional counseling firm that you go and try to get something fixed when you walk in the door and walk out a brand new person, which doesn't work because it's really about life transformation and changing other things inside of us that really are broken and discovering what they are and being healed of those things, which a lot of that we're going to be talking about today. We also extend this process into leadership development, as we believe leadership starts from within. In the home is translated outwardly from there, and it's not just being a great problem solver or decision maker, but really developing a heart to lead and raise other people up to whom they are called to be, much what we just talked about for ourselves. So once we have that process underway within ourselves, hopefully we see the need for that in life, and what we want to do is we really want to pass that on to those that we're leading. And that includes developing character, integrity, accountability, and all the other hallmarks of genuine leadership. So we really offer a comprehensive approach to personal growth and maturity, from the individual to the CEOs and businesses and everybody in between, basically. So throughout our broadcast today, you'll see some banners on the screen intermittently on how to connect with us if you'd like to do that. And then the live shows, which we're doing right now, are here to feature testimonies of people's lives that have been transformed in this process that we just talked about, in many, many different ways, still on their journey. Other professionals in the field of helping others in similar ways, EIS staff, counselors, authors of books that we believe are important resources that support our work here at EIS. And then finally, before we get started today, I want to remind you to post your questions throughout the broadcast. You'll see on the bottom of the screen right now, these are our topics for today. Today's a little bit different because this is an open forum. And with our guest, Damalie, we're going to be kind of fielding some of these questions. Many people have sent some of these questions in already that we already kind of have ready to go that we're going to be talking about. But you're still welcome to put up your questions on these topics, scrolling up on the bottom of the screen right there. But before we get with Damalie, I want to introduce my co-host for today, and you all know her. And here's Vanessa. If I can find that button. There we go.
Hi, Bill.
Hi.
How are
Yes,
you?
look at that. We got applause. We got everything going on.
I love that. Such a warm welcome.
I'm going to put a little fade out there. How you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
Very good. This is the part where we pretend we haven't talked.
Yeah.
And we're just kind of getting right on there, right?
Exactly. But I'm super excited about this. I know this is a new format for us to do the open forum, and I'm excited to be able to ask some questions. Some, like you said, that have been sent in. I incorporated some of my own, slid those in there. So I'm really excited to hear from you and Damalie, definitely.
Yeah, it's really cool.
Hi, Anita. I'm reading the comments.
That's right. You're fielding the command post. I do want to remind everybody, and I forgot to say this before I let you in, that you are our social media and tech czar, handling all of our social media postings and helping out, of course, with the lives and doing all the technical stuff that when I do it myself when you're not around, it's pretty demanding over here. I got to keep an eye on every single thing that's going on, like you just did. Is like, hi Cynthia, hi Anita, and put them up on the screen and all that other stuff. So thank you for being here.
Of course, I'm happy.
Yay! All right, so I want to get on to bringing Damalie on, but I want to do a little bit of an intro about Damalie. Damalie and I started. I don't know. I lost track of the years. It's probably like 12 or 13 years or so, something like that. Back when I was working still with New York City Relief and started my counseling business in the evenings and weekends, and ran into Damalie at a church that I was also on staff with, and we both were offering courses, and we both had, there was like an information table, and we were both set up there, and I didn't know who she was, but there was just the two of us kind of standing there waiting for people to come out from a conference, so we could greet them and offer our coursework and stuff. So I walked over and I introduced myself to her. And it was immediately, once she started talking, I said, this person is a reflection of myself. She had the same training and a lot of other training on top of that as well. But the NCCA training, the temperament stuff, and all the stuff that's very common to EIS, she had all that. So it was really, it was just astounding. And so we kind of exchanged numbers, and I basically had just started referring some people to her that I thought would be a good fit for her. She was working out of another church in North Jersey, and one thing kind of led to another. We just started working together. And that was the first seed that started this EIS thing rolling in the first place, way back in 2015, when we had that mass temperament event with Tony's group and actually Vinny's group back in those days. And here we are at EIS. This thing really took off. And so, she's awesome. You're going to be astounded at the wisdom that she brings to the table every time that I'm around her. And she speaks at an event or everything. I usually have my mouth hanging open.
It's always a mic drop.
Mic drop. That's a better description than a jaw hanging open. I guess it looks a little bit better than that. So, but anyway, let's welcome Damalie. Yes. Wait a minute. Let me get there we go.
Hi.
All the applause.
Hi.
Hey.
Vanessa. Hi, everyone. Hi. How are you doing?
Great. So happy to see you, be with you, hear from you today. It's going to be so awesome.
I'm finally happy to be here on Build AIS Lives.
I know we've been awaiting your arrival, definitely. And I know that there's definitely going to be a big audience out there watching, that you're definitely a fan favorite.
I'm excited to be here. I can't wait to see what we're going to have to do today.
Well, yeah. And, when I thought about you, because most of the time it's been an interview kind of a situation with even our counselors and stuff. But I thought, since you and I, kind of started this thing way back when, I just thought the idea of an open forum just came to mind. Yeah. And I love the idea of having people being able to ask questions, and of course, many people submitted those questions already. And hopefully, as you're all watching today, you'll be able to put some more questions up there. And we'll be able to field them, kind of more towards the end of the broadcast. But anyway, yeah. It's about 12 years, right?
I can't even count because it's been a while. Life moves so fast. Those days I don't even remember. It's been a while. So we just go over 10 years, but it's more than 10 years, 12 years or something.
And a lot of the couples that we're working with weren't married. They were thinking about getting married when they come in. They were kind of dating or engaged. Now they're having babies all over the place.
Babies, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
When we first came, they were considering getting married, and now they have babies.
Yep. So that tells you we've been around a while already. So
yeah, it's a beautiful journey to watch and experience.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, you want to get going?
Go ahead.
Want to get rolling with this thing? All right. So it looks like Vanessa is going to be reading the questions. I know the first one is a real long one. So we're going to do our best to kind of pick that one apart and pick out the areas in there that we can address.
Yes. So I will be, since that one is a longer one, I'm going to just be looking down at my phone, make sure I got all the components in there. But so this one reads, my husband has started a new job almost a year ago. He looks over 200 people as a manager of a big corporation under high stress. He deals with a lot of things that people can easily take care of themselves, or has a lot of heart-to-hearts with a lot of men who have broken marriages and personal issues and drama from their own homes. How can he deal, and how can I help him deal at home? He is burning out and taking things out on us and is too tired from both his job, and we have a newborn, 2-year-old, and hyper 9-year-old. They all crave attention, and I'm ready for a break from baby. He works long hours all week and is out of character because he is tired. He was helping me with the baby in the middle of the night, but some nights I would let him sleep without sleeping with the baby so I could get a break as I nurse him. It hurts my hips sleeping in the one position all night for days on end. Is that too selfish of me to ask for help giving him the baby to sleep with him? How can I help him balance dealing with normal home life and everyone else's lives instead of him only being able to do so much for everyone else and being too tired to deal with home? Again, it's out of character for him. as he is always like Superman. Even I know Superman has rest days. But both sides need balance. It's to the point where home life is being neglected in a way. What can I do?
Quite a loaded question.
It's a very, very loaded question.
Or several questions, actually. So
Yeah.
you want to start that off, Damalie?
I mean, there's a lot of things going on. I hope the person who asked this question is seeing someone, because this is almost so much for one person to be processing by themselves. The other thing that comes into my mind, first of all, is does the couple see the problem as do they see it together as a problem? Because is she the only one that is seeing it as it is, or does he see it as she's also able to see it, so that they are seeing the problem on the same page? There are so many things that are going on. That the new job, the new job itself, not knowing what the temperament is, depending on what temperament the person is having. If they are melancholies, that's a high stress, because melancholies don't adjust so well with new changes. So that in itself is a stressor, on top of the fact that he also has to adjust to the environment that he's going into, and the new expectations that they have in there. Even managing over 200 people. And it sounds like he's a very caretaking person, like he cares about everyone's problems, which can veer into, where are my boundaries? Is this work related? Is this personal? And do we do it at the office, or do we do it outside? All those dynamics being figured out. He may have to look into that before even he can move forward a lot. And then what I also see, his priorities, I think, is he able to see that his work right now has taken more priority than his home, that his marriage and his family is being neglected while he's taking care of the new changes that are going on in his office. If he doesn't see that, then it will create a problem, because again, if the person is in a leadership position, depending on what temperament they have, if they are cholerics, then they feel like it's their job to make sure that the job is done at work. And then we are very intricate beings. There is not one solution to all the problems. We are very intricate. There is your temperament, there is your life experiences, then there is your relationship dynamics with the people you're with right now. So not knowing his experiences of life with all the stresses that he's working with, we don't know if he's functioning from a place of performance, or he was raised in a place where he had to be the responsible one. Is he the firstborn? Was he the parent? Was he the one making sure that everyone is taken care of, that he doesn't know how to take off that hat? And now the lists are just getting longer and longer and longer, and it's the same person, not knowing where to draw the line, the area that veers into the boundaries at work. Like, just because your coworkers have marital problems doesn't always mean that it's always going to be your responsibility to address them, especially in a work setting. And if you do say something, what can you say and for how long, so that it doesn't become a drain on his life? Because that is now bleeding into his marriage at home, his family. His wife has a newborn. They have a baby. They have babies, and then between her physical well-being and the children, it's a lot going on. That's why I say I hope they are talking to someone, and they may have to really. One thing I would say, that at least they could sit down and agree that these problems are here in our relationship, so that they see eye to eye. Because if she's the only one seeing it, then he may not look at it like she's looking at it. That can become another stressor. I would encourage for them to really manage stress. Stress is part of life. No one is exempted from it. Anything that causes you to adjust, whether it's mental, physical, anything that causes you to adjust, that becomes a stressor. So there are so many changes going on, so many adjustments going on. They need to sit down and prioritize. So sometimes we stress about things, like, I'm just using this as an example. He may think about someone at his job with his marriage, that they are getting a divorce, just like an example. If someone at work is getting a divorce, and that is killing him and is weighing on him so heavily, and then he goes from that, because he's still thinking about that, he's not managing his stress well, because he's prioritizing things that are not in his control as a high priority, instead of prioritizing his family as the most important thing, then manage the stressors at home, and then manage the stressors in your work environment so that you can be able to be yourself. Because again, stress is part of life, but if you don't know how to manage it, then the stress manages you, and then before you know it, the rest that you're avoiding to take, you will get sick, and then finally you'll be in a hospital bed or just sick, resting because you refuse to rest on your own terms. Now you're resting on someone else's terms, your sickness or the doctor's recommendation. So that's what I have to say. I mean, there's a lot that could go on, but Bill, you can jump in and.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that, you said like prioritizing, my thought was, and you actually had this as one of your notes, that it's not up to her to find the solutions. It's up to the both of them to do that. And, when we work with couples, of course, we're always strongly suggesting that they meet together, read a book together, develop a dialogue and basically emotional intimacy together and become a team, become one in that marital situation. And so many times all of these stressors push that aside because of the tyranny of the urgent, as the book calls it, And so I would definitely put that in there too, is that they need to regroup and realize that they need to be a strong team, because they're going to be destroyed in that mix of both, kind of individually carrying the weight and the load of each other's or their own burdens. Because that's what it seems like, is like, I feel like, I'm doing all this work, but you're not helping me. That's what it seems like.
Right.
Because we're both so consumed, with our own weight that we're carrying, and it can easily appear that way. And I think it actually could kind of turn out that way too, because you each become an island. And again, you mentioned temperament before too. If we're melancholies and we're really independent, for example, then that's going to be accentuated.
Yeah.
And if somebody's a supine, they're not going to be expressing their real feelings, and then they're going to be hurt and angry, and they're not going to say anything. They'll just keep sweeping it under the rug, and so on and so on and so on. So to me, that's the main thing that kind of jumped out based on your last comment there on that. Before we move on to the next questions, though, Vanessa, you had actually brought this out and I forgot to write it down, is that maybe we should do a brief description of all the topics that we're talking about today. And that might help people to maybe come up with some fresh questions too.
Yeah.
So let's kind of define these areas. They're codependency, boundaries, parental inversion, and trauma bonds. I know parental inversion, not everybody's going to know what that is, or even trauma bonds. The codependency and boundaries are probably much more identifiable for people. But let's talk about codependency. I think, and boundaries, they kind of go hand in hand. Damalie, what's your quick definition of codependency?
Codependency, let me first say this. The word itself it came out of the Alcohol Anonymous, or the alcoholism, where they were trying to learn about substance abuse. And they started to realize that people who are enabling, what we know as enablers, they had altered their lifestyles to accommodate the one who was using the drug, whatever the substance was. And so their lifestyle changed just to accommodate the person who was addicted. So the term codependence is when you alter your lifestyle because of someone else's problems. Then you start to manage their lives, because now you can no longer focus on your life. You're focusing on their problems and making sure that they're okay. But while you're doing it, you're losing yourself. And so, again, we are very intricate. The way a choleric becomes codependent is not the same way a supine becomes codependent, or a phlegmatic or a sanguine. And so everyone is different. So there are people who are controlling codependent, meaning that they micromanage everything. And then there are people who are passive codependent, where they just go along with whatever is being told to them. So it's very various. But the ultimate thing is, every time you alternate your lifestyle because of someone else's problem, then you become codependent on them.
And that's where the loss of boundaries comes in too, because you'll cross your own boundaries. Mm-hmm. You'll cross other people's boundaries to get at them, because you want to control them and make sure they're doing this or make sure they're not doing that. Like you said, it kind of ties back to loved ones and of alcoholics and so on, and addicts. They're trying to control their behavior with good motivation, right? With good intentions.
Right.
They can be very good intentions, but we lose
Mm.
it starts to become its own dysfunction.
Yes.
That's why the old saying is the road to hell is paved with good intentions. When good intentions can go awry very quickly, especially with areas of codependency and boundaries.
Yeah. Yeah. Because you think that you're helping the person, but you really are losing yourself and becoming toxic because your actions are actually making the other person more sick. They're not helping. There's no solution. That's why it becomes difficult to get out because what you're doing in your mindset is helping the other person. And of course, that person needs what you're giving them, but at the same time, they're not healthy to engage with you. So it becomes toxic and you get lost in it.
Yeah,
And then
enabling. I was
Mhm.
just going to say, enabling is another facet of this too. When we're codependent, like we might move into a place of enabling the other person. Like when you talk about addicts, alcoholics, especially addicts, there's a lot of like parents of addicts that will, like for example, they'll let the kids smoke dope at home because they'd rather them do it at home than do it out there in the world around them. Or,
Right.
well, if I go buy them beer, then they're not spending the money, and they're all these kind of crazy things.
Right.
So enabling is another facet of codependency that can come across. And again, like all these boundaries are crossed. There are no boundaries with codependency.
There are no boundaries because when you put it in, let's say, in the context of someone using drugs, they've already disrespected your boundaries because what they are doing is now affecting you. They don't care about what you're doing or how what they are doing is affecting your life. They're just worried about themselves. And now you get to get involved in their world, like you're so concerned, you can't live without them, or whatever they do is going to affect you. And it becomes a very toxic dependence on each other that is not healthy. I mean, we are humans. There is that human element in all of us to relate to one another, to depend, being interdependent of each other. But when you're codependent, it means that your existence is almost depending on the other person. And that's not 100% true, but when you're in it, you feel like that's what it's supposed to be.
Yeah, it's definitely it's a big deal. I mean, I spent many years
Yeah.
codependent on a lot of different levels. So this is where it kind of dovetails even into parental inversion and trauma bonds. So
Yeah.
when a lot of people don't know what parental inversion is, but the boundary that gets crossed, and Damalie, you're much more of in tune with this than I've ever been, because I know your Elijah House training really teaches about this.
Yeah.
But the point I want to make is that what happens is the parent is actually crossing what I would call a sacred boundary of a child when they impose adulthood on a child when they're still a child, when they're giving them responsibilities of an adult when they're a child. And then you can, if you would expound on that in a moment, and then the trauma bonds wind up being some of the after effects of that child moving ahead in adulthood.
Yeah. Yeah. There are many ways we get inverted in relationships. The parental, like you said, when the roles are reversed, the child becomes the parent and the parent becomes the child. And so many times this can be as a result of, like, let's say, a lot of times in immigration that happens where um, the parents come in the new culture and they can't speak the language, and then the children have to take on those responsibilities of learning how to pay the bills, learning how to take the phone calls, learning how to interpret and things like that. And before you know, that life of the child is put on a back burner, and now the child has to take on all these responsibilities. And then the most difficult thing with parental inversion is, like, it's very hard to reverse it. It's really like, because you do these noble things that you're proud of, especially when you're young and you're doing all these adult things like chip on your shoulder, everybody's proud and everybody's gonna be liking you. But parental inversion, you usurp the authority of the parent, meaning that you have no regard of the parent. And like I say, it sounds so noble, but it's also disregarding. You have no respect when the parent is not able to fulfill the role of a parent. Because one of the responsibilities is parents are supposed to be fully responsible for their children. emotionally, physically, mentally, all the way. So when a parent is, let's say, using drugs and they are not able to be the parent to the child, then the role is, there is a gap. So when a child sees the gap, the child takes on the role. So it's not always voluntary given. Most times it's not voluntary. Exception is just that the circumstances, like if it's, there is drugs, if there is an unhealthy marriage where both parents are not healthy enough to be responsible, and the children decide, you know what, maybe we don't need parents. We can do this on our own. We'll figure out how to be responsible. I'll get a job. You go do this, and then mom and dad. And when you step in that role, it's like your respect of your parents is out of the way. It's very hard to respect someone who is not able to give to you the thing that they were supposed to give to you. And sometimes, yes, the parent is also meant to provide healthy boundaries, like we were talking about, boundaries for the child. We all have a conscience of knowing right from wrong, but for children, there is the demonstration of love for a child is also discipline. When kids are able to do whatever they want, they interpret that you don't care because they watch their friends and their families that are being responsible, almost like, don't go out in the night, don't do this thing. But my parents let me do whatever I want. They have no respect of that. So when they are getting older, they don't look at you as a parent because you didn't provide those boundaries of knowing what is right and what is wrong and what is healthy and not what is not healthy. So that boundaries get crossed. And sometimes there is also that element of substitute met where the parent uses a child for spousal support. You know, for example, I'm just going to give an example. If a parent is a sanguine, for example, and usually it crosses where the mother is more connected to that, uses the son for a husband, for husband emotional needs. So if she needs the hugs, she just uses the son. She hugs the son to get hugs from the son, not because the son wants to give her the hug, but the mother is using that as a way of getting the hugs that she could have got from the mom, from the husband. And sometimes they share information with children that is inappropriate. You know, you talk to your children about your marital issues. Your children should not be in your marital issues because they are not built to engage with that stress. You know, because they are thinking the existence of a child is dependent upon the safety of their parents. So if the parents are not okay, that means the child is not okay, meaning that they are not going to feel that they are safe and secure. So they are always watching. Are they okay? Are they going to get divorced? So that oversharing of personal information goes into the child and goes back into those trauma bondings whereby now you bond based upon always being mindful of what is going on the other person because there was no security in bonding in love, so you connect in toxicity. When every time there is a toxic dynamic, that's where you feel love because that's where your parents were sharing all this information that you didn't have to know per se. And yeah, Vanessa, you're smiling.
Mic drop.
You want to say something, Vanessa?
Oh no, you're just blowing my mind, and the way that you connect everything is just like perfect. I'm like,
oh yeah.
Yeah. You know, it's kind of like, you know, when we are growing up, they say that the needs of a child, the same-sex parent meets your emotions, you know, role models are behavior, but the opposite sex parent meets your emotional needs. So for the sons, they get their emotional needs met by their mothers, and for the sons, for the daughters, they get their emotional needs met by their fathers. So when those lines are blurred or they are crossed, it confuses the child. So imagine if you're one who was, your parent connected you as a spouse, what does that do to your marriage when you get married? You don't even see your husband or your wife because you're looking at them through the lens of your parents because the line was so blurred and was so broken. Uh, and also with parental inversion, like being in that, when you see that need, you know, your parents are, let's say, financially struggling, or they are just ill, sick, and there is that need. where the parents are not able to give that parental support. The child sees the need. Like I said, some people go and start to work and they start taking care of medical stuff. So I mean, if you're out there and you have experienced this parental inversion, it's almost paradoxical because you do these noble things, but then you are put in a predicament where you always have to manage the world. The world has to go on. Life has to go on, and it's all depending on you. So when you add into being codependent, it just mixes up. So imagine if you were raised by an alcoholic or an addicted parent, and you're in your codependency, and then you took on the roles of a parent. So imagine what happens to you if you're choleric or melancholy, you get married. Bill, what do you say to that?
Yeah, and then the dual role too, because I see this a lot, is that the person has become the other parent because of a divorce situation or whatever. So they have a dual role with the existing parent. One is the spouse or the substitute mate, and then the other is still the daughter or son. So they're spoken to on different levels. If I'm confiding in you and my financial stuff, or maybe my dating situation, and I want to talk to you about it as an adult, but then as a child, like a daughter or a son, you're doing something that's displeasing to me or I don't like, then I'll treat you like a daughter and I'll get angry at you, and now I'll treat you like the bad daughter.
Yeah.
So the only time, or son, so the only time I'm actually getting praised is if I'm in that role,
Yeah.
Of an adult,
Yeah.
which was perverted in the first place. I know we got to get to these questions. We could talk all day, and it's like Cynthia wrote, we need a live stream for each topic. Probably true. But you said the existence of the child is based on the safety of the parents.
Yeah, children
Wow.
need parents. Children need parents to exist, but parents don't need children to exist. So when the emotional security of a child is dependent upon making sure that mom and dad are okay. So every time they are stressing, if your parents out there, when you're stressing, it stresses your children because their existence is depending on your being, on your happiness. Like, are you stable? Are you okay? Because if you're not okay, am I going to have a place to stay? Am I going to be able to see my friends? Will I be able to go back to school? Will I be able to do all those other things that kids are thinking about while you're dealing with your marriage and you're stressed with your marriage? So they need parents to exist, but parents don't need children. And so sometimes when parents act in selfish ways, it really ingrain in a child an identity that is not theirs, and that's where they go into that striving to perform for love, because in their being they don't know how to be loved without performing. They have to earn the love. And so I don't even know, with the first question that we had, if the person also had some of those elements, to be overwhelmed, like you're striving so hard, like that they say that I've worked so hard that I forgot who I am. I forgot who I am. That you forget your sense of self because you're caught up in a role, you're caught up in earning love, you're always striving and striving. There is no sense of relaxing. Like, you're always going, 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 and the list just keeps adding and adding. So when they tell you to rest, you're like, what does that even mean? You've never rested since you were a kid. Now you're gonna rest as an adult with your own kids and your own job and all that stuff. It's a lot. So,
well, plus when you go to get married, it's very easy to place that kind of demand on the person that you're intending to marry. If you're more proactive than, let's say you're a choleric or whatever, and you're very responsible, because of this, and then you marry somebody who's a phlegmatic, and doesn't have the same drive or anything. You're like, what is this? Like, you're not allowed to be that way. Like, you're always disappointed in them. And so that's where the generational thing comes in too, is it just keeps passing along, as you keep moving. And if you don't know that this is actually happening to you, these are generational transfers that just keep moving on.
Yeah, you find sometimes that there are generations in families where they never take care of their kids, that they always abandon their children, that grandparents always take over, or the assistant takes over, or the aunties take over. And just a generational abandonment or rejection or neglect of responsibilities, and my children just have to learn not to need. And that's one of the areas when you have taken on that role, it's very hard to need because nobody ever gave to you anything. So what do you need anything for?
Mm-hmm.
You can work for yourself, you can do everything on your own. And even when they go into relationships, they don't need their spouses. The spouses need them, but they don't need
Mm.
you know. And
We
so
think we might think we do, but
yes,
we actually don't.
no,
We do. We might think we do, but we actually don't on the backside of it.
yeah,
You know
yeah,
what I mean? Because there's no way, you mentioned this earlier, I think, is like there's no way to have a clean filter to know what's what. And that's why like this whole EIS principle of really becoming and understanding who you are without all of that is so crucial. And you can't do that unless you're healed of these things, so that you can have a clean filter when you're moving into a relationship, so that you're not, that's the baggage that we talk about all the time. You're just dragging into these relationships thinking like, like, I just want to get married and have a nice family and, be normal. But it's impossible if you're dragging this kind of stuff into that relationship.
Yeah, and also sometimes when people define being in a relationship, the way like the simple question of what is marriage, the person who is coming from a parentally invited home, their definition of marriage may be completely different from someone who grew up in a healthy marital home, so their interpretation is I'll do all the work, you don't have to do anything, and then at the same time you don't even know how to connect with the fact that a healthy marriage has to be mutual. There is no mutuality. It's always uneven. It's like unbalanced all the time, because you need them, of course. Remember that you need them, but they don't need you. But so if you're married and your definition of marriage is I do all the work, then I'm gonna resent you for not doing it. But I will not say that to you, because I love you and I'll do everything no matter what, but then I still resent you for not doing anything. But you don't say, they don't come out right like that. You just have to read between the lines. You see the attitudes and the slamming of the doors and the silent treatments, and that's how you know this is more than the dishes, or the laundry or the groceries. Because they don't even communicate well,
Well, we better get on to some questions or we won't have any time.
I know we're running out of time here.
You guys keep going. I'm living for it. I'm like blown away. I think just to move into the next question, and I know, Damalie, you so very well articulated just how codependency and boundaries are usually interconnected and one leads to the other. So one of the questions we received are, what are signs of codependency and how does one go about changing and healing and I guess breaking that type of cycle?
Right. I think it not, because I think sometimes when people are in relationships, a lot of people assume that they are in a codependent relationship. And I think you have to first of all be sure that it's codependent as opposed to assuming that it is because you need the other person. Because we don't want you to believe that you cannot need your spouse. If you're in an intimate relationship, a marital relationship, you have to know how to be interdependent of each other. But what usually happens is one person is not emotionally available, so the one who needs the emotional connection is the one that looks like they're being codependent. And so then the label is thrown at you, start being codependent, And then you're like, but I married you, so am I not to ask for anything from you? What is that supposed to be? And so I think it's very crucial to know whether it's actually codependent, is that you are altering your lifestyle because of someone else's brokenness. Otherwise, you're going to assume every time I need my husband or my wife or I miss them and I'm being codependent, and that's not necessarily the case. So that's one thing out. The signs, again, making sure that everything is in control. It's going to look different for everyone. A supine codependence is not going to look like a choleric codependency. So that's why I want to highlight that element of changing your lifestyle to accommodate someone else's brokenness. If they don't want to go to counseling and you're changing your lifestyle, your emotions are being rattled because they don't want to go to counseling, now you're becoming codependent on them because you don't think that you can be okay unless they do something about their life. They have made their decision, they don't want to do it. And so you have to know how to live with that decision and maintaining your healthy boundaries without thinking that you cannot live unless they do something. Because then you become a mini God. Like, until you do as I say, this is not going to work. So, again, that's why you do premarital counseling to know what you're getting into before you get in there and you realize, oops, what did I get myself into?
Mm-hmm.
Bill, I know you have something more to say to that.
Well, the question too is how what are the signs of codependency? And I reposted something on Instagram like a week or so ago and said always making sure that everybody's emotions are okay or whatever all the time is a trauma response, which is really codependency, because codependency is a symptom of a trauma response one way or the other. There's something broken underneath that, whether it's parental inversion or other issues that I've, in my baggage and my bag of tricks that I've moved along with and I've never dealt with. And like you said, we always suggest people do this stuff before they get married so that they have the opportunity to, to wade through this and to have a perspective and look at it for what it actually is. So my answer to that is like if you see any of these things that we're talking about, well, there's a reason to look into it. And you might want to read a book or check in with somebody who can give you an answer that can kind of diagnose that. I'm jumping ahead of the game, but today's book of the week is this book here called Breaking Free of the Codependency Trap by the Weinholds. It's a hefty book. This is beyond the Melody Beattie kind of stuff. I always kind of do this sideways here. There we go. But it's a powerful book. And there's a sister book called what is it? Something about the flight from intimacy, the sister to codependency, which is counterdependency, which is I don't need anybody. But for right now, we're talking about this. And if you read a book like this, or even Codependent No More or The New Codependency by Melody Beattie, you'll be able to kind of check into that and see, hey, am I exhibiting any of these, behavior patterns? And how do I change and heal? Well, you're going to have to apply these things to your life, and you're probably going to need some help one way or the other. So I would, check into EIS or some other form of professional help that can hold you accountable to that and do the work, because it takes the work to do this, right, Ness?
Yeah. Even like developing that sense of self, because like the fear that you're not going to be okay without the other person or whatever the dynamic of that. You have to learn to be okay in your sense of self, that you can be okay. And when you learn to engage that can also help you in your journey to heal. I mean, it's a lot in there. It's just a lack of time. That's why you have to make it brief.
So Ness, why don't we jump, because I have the paper in front of me. Why don't we jump past that second one there, because it sounds like we've kind of dealt with that a bit, and go on to the next one about the empathy.
Yeah, just quickly, Bill, I don't know if you happen to know, someone had asked in the comments the counter dependency book. Do you know the title?
I have it right here, yeah. It's called The Flight from Intimacy, the same authors, which is the Weinholds. Can you see that? There we go.
Yeah. And I'm going to add one thing onto that next question about the married couple who is supposed to always have each other's back. Can they be codependent? One of the most important things for couples is your emotional well-being is going to affect each other, because one of the things that creates safety in a relationship is that the security or the assurance that when I need you, you will be there when I need you, as opposed to I cannot rely on you. Because when I cannot rely on you, you're going to make me feel like I'm doing something. It causes a disconnect. The relationship, a marital relationship depends on the I of the relationship and the we of the relationship. Like I myself, I know how to be whole, but I also know how to be, we also know how to be together as as a couple. So when there is no balance between the I and the we, where the I is higher than the we, that you spend more time with your own self as opposed to together as a couple, it creates a gap. So when you don't spend time with each other as a couple, it's almost like you're starving for emotional connectedness. And they did a research about this, and they put mothers with kids, and they let the mothers leave the room, and they watched the kids' response or reactions when the mothers left the room and they came back. So they realized that the mothers who were calm and nurturing and attentive to their children, when they would leave the room, the children would be calm. But when the parents were neglectful and abusive and not available to the kids, when they left the room, the kids got angry and agitated and they were very distressed. And so because the assumption is when you become an adult, you're supposed to be mature and you're not supposed to be emotional at all. But it's a scientific reaction that when the person that you love is not there for you when you need them, it causes your being to respond to that. So when you're in a marital relationship and there is no connectedness with each other, it creates that salvation where now you get angry, now you get reactive, not because you're codependent, it's because the connection is weak and you need to do things to strengthen that relationship. Because when you don't do that, then you're going to think you're being codependent, when in reality, you need to balance the connectivity of each other so that there is no starvation for emotional connections. That's what I wanted to add into there. I know I could go on and on, but let's just keep it.
So good. So the next question is, how can you balance being empathetic versus taking on what a loved one is feeling?
Like that, almost like being a burden bearer. Being empathetic is not supposed to be a burden. When you don't have boundaries, emotional, spiritual, mental boundaries, that's when you overstep into someone else's problems. I mean, we work with people on a regular basis. We've taken a lot of people's pain and all that stuff, but we also know how to have our own boundaries, that when I'm ending a session, I'm not carrying that session with me for the end of the week. Because at the end of the day, if we don't do our own boundaries, we'll be a disaster. We will not be able to listen to anyone's pain, because every time we listen to it, we are falling apart. So you have to know how to develop healthy boundaries, meaning that is that your responsibility. You can, when something is beyond your control, you either give it to other people or you share it, or ultimately God, give it to God, because it's beyond your control. Otherwise, it's going to weigh you down, not because it's supposed to, but now it becomes a burden. And caring for people should not become a burden to you. It should not destroy you. You should have healthy boundaries where your empathy can be healthy as opposed to going into overstepping.
And again, taking everything that we've talked about up until now into consideration, like, the parental inversion and everything that we've already talked about, if you don't have that stuff kind of cleared out in your mind and heart and, worked through those things, you're just not going to have a back to that clean filter. You're not going to be able to have a clean enough filter to be able to know the difference between things.
Yeah.
Because you're always going to be crossing lines because you don't know what else to do. You're going to try to fix something, or you're going to try to build a wall, and you're going to, try to protect yourself. You're going to be doing all these mechanisms just by default, because that's all you have. That's the only reference point that you have. So when you ask the question of, these issues of, genuine empathy, and what's that boundary, you're not going to be able to figure that out until you start dealing with the underlying issues. And that's why we talk about root systems all the time. Like, if you don't do the root system work and deal with the stuff that's inside of your heart, and you just try to fix a symptom, you're going to be lost.
And I know that sometimes people get frustrated with digging these roots, but in order for you to understand where you're from, you have to examine where you're coming from. It's very unfair to think that the past is in the past and let's just start afresh. That doesn't work. You're just prolonging the journey for yourself. And yes, sometimes it may be very difficult. It may be sticky and uncomfortable. Yes, but you go back and deal with it. Otherwise, you're building on a faulty foundation. It's not going to last too long.
Mm-hmm. Well, what's the next one there, Ness?
Yeah, someone asked, what are signs of a healthy relationship and what sort of boundaries might you see in a healthy relationship?
Oh my God, that's a very, very long list of things to make sure that the relationship is healthy. One of the most important things that it has to be mutual. I always think about it like a dance. If you're trying to dance, and one person is dancing on one pace and the other one is on another rhythm and it's not working, then you have to be honest that you're not on the same page. You're not rhyming together. So you have to be mutual. It's not 50 and 50. It's not 120. It's not one person giving 80 and the other person is giving 20. You know, especially for melancholics, they are very self-sacrificial. They could bend over backwards and self-sacrifice themselves because they love someone. But sometimes if the person is not giving to you mutually 100% what you're giving, you have to be honest with yourself. You have to tell yourself the truth that this is not balanced and it's going to come back and bite you. So there has to be mutuality. There has to be faithfulness. There has to be, I mean, it's a lot of things. Like I said, this could be like a laundry list, but the ability to be respectful, being respectful of someone. And I think sometimes people hear, let's say, the word respect. And if you don't have a sense of self, and people were using you all the time, you don't even know what being used and not being used look like. To you, they may be the same, you know? And so that sense, you have to first of all be whole within yourself. Like that sense of self has to be strong. That just because a person is not cussing you out doesn't mean that they respect you. They may not cuss you out, but they may do other things. So your gauge of what respect looks like, you have to be able to know what that is so that you're not deceived or you're not telling yourself things that are not necessarily the truth. The person is willing to accept when they are wrong, you know, especially like that question about boundaries, you know, when someone does wrong and they put it back on you, like this is a very choleric trait. Cholerics have a hard time acknowledging that they are wrong. They don't easily apologize. They find a way to put it back on you so that you're the one apologizing to them. So if you're in a relationship and the person is not willing to even apologize for the things that they do, it's not going to be healthy because you're always going to take the fall. And before you know it, how long can you do that for? You know, there has to be support of each other's pursuits, you know, that you support each other as opposed to once you started doing this relationship, you dropped all your aspirations, you dropped out of school, you don't even do your work anymore because you're in a relationship. That is, again, there are so many things. It's unrealistic for me to think that I'm going to put all of it here. So.
Yeah, I think just Damalie, to go along with that, just because someone had wrote this, it goes along with what you just said. Someone had asked, how is that mutuality supposed to be communicated in a marriage?
If you have a sense of self, you know, like you know what your needs are and you know what your needs are, what the other person's needs are, you know. So mutuality for, let's say, a melancholy may not look like mutuality for a choleric. But the thing about it is that there is that level of respect, and you know in your heart that there is in your conscience that the person is reciprocating. But if you're always the one giving, there are no boundaries, you're the one almost doing the work, and the other person you're always making excuses for the other person for not doing their part, then that becomes a challenge because we all have a sense of right and wrong, but this idea that I don't know what is right is neglectful. It's very almost like irresponsible that you don't know what it feels like when someone is disrespecting you. You know, that you want to be connected to yourself to that degree that you know that this is not okay, because we all are emotional and our emotions are like messengers. I always tell people, like, think about like when you're driving a car and there is a dashboard. Just because you don't have time to go to the mechanic doesn't mean that that check engine light should just forget about showing up on your dashboard. It has nothing to do with whether you have time or not. So everything that you're feeling, if you neglect how you're feeling, especially anger, that you're always angry in a relationship, those are indications of something is not okay, something is not right. So how you resolve conflict also is an indicator of whether the relationship is healthy. Like again, there's so many things I could say, but neutrality is you know what you can tolerate, because every relationship is different. One person is able to tolerate certain things and another one may not. So it's not like uniform, but the element of neutrality is 100, 100. It's not 58 and 50. It's not 80 and 20, but it's 100 and 100.
Mm-hmm.
I think just because I'm reading from our list, and these two questions touch on pretty similar subject of boundaries being pushed and them not maybe being respected. So if someone continues to dishonor a boundary, do you stop saying anything or keep addressing it but not expect them to honor it? So how do you go about that? Because obviously in an ideal situation, everyone would just respect the boundaries that you put in place, but unfortunately that's not the case.
Yeah. Actually, this happens to me many times. I have friends that do not respect time at all. 4 means 7, 7 means 10. So that's how in a way that they roll in a way most times. But initially, I had expressed the frustration, at least on my end. And what I realized, that person was consistently justifying why they were late. Initially, it wasn't bothering me, but then it started to bother me. Then I started, okay, I can no longer accept this. This is now, you don't even have any regard for what I'm expressing to you. You're just going to do what you want. So now I also stopped respecting their boundary. And at the same time, I no longer, the dynamic changes. If a person disrespects your boundary, you have to accept that your dynamics are going to be different. That the relationship is not going to be safe as it could have been because there is no respectability of each other. And so when they keep pressing it and they are pushing it, it is sad. Sometimes you lose friendships like that. Sometimes you lose relationships, or the dynamic of how it could have been can change. But once the person pushes past your limits, you have to know where to draw the line. And you say that no more, I can no longer do this. Otherwise, you're going to get resentful and bitter, and it's not worth it. You know, no one is worth you being bitter and resentful and all that stuff, because you don't give that to someone. You don't want to give that much power to any human being where you push past your limits, and you have to subject yourself to taking it. If they cannot listen to your expressions, then you just change the dynamics of it. They're no longer safe. In other words, the person is no longer safe for you. So if you consider that unsafe, and then you limit that, you draw the line of what is going to be shared and what's not going to be shared. Otherwise, you're going to get hurt.
Yeah, I think it's important to recognize too that I mentioned this earlier, is that when you're in a, whether it's, you're dating or with a significant other of some kind or married, this is not like taking sides kind of an issue. I think like establishing boundaries a lot of times can present itself that way. Like, well, this is dysfunctional, I have to build a boundary. And a lot of times building boundaries can become building walls.
Yeah.
And we don't want to build walls. And the way to avoid that is to do this in a much more proactive way in terms of doing it together with someone. That, for example, we recognize that we have issues within the relationship that, we cross each other's boundaries. There's unhealthy lack of boundaries, whatever it is that we're dealing with. We're finding that we're codependent, we're this, we're that. We have to come together and recognize that something's wrong that needs, repairing, so that we can work together towards that. Because I've seen people try to build boundaries when it's a one-sided affair, and it just becomes walls because people are protecting themselves. And then once again, if they're not dealing with the past issues because they grew up having to protect themselves, because of traumatic issues when they were growing up, they drag that into the relationship, and that's their posturing. because I just have to protect myself, and I see this other person is crossing my boundaries. So we want to make sure that we're working together in situations like this. And again, working from the inside out, not the outside in. In other words, not just dealing with the symptoms of what's going on and what's wrong inside of each of us in terms of the relationship, and not just the symptoms like, oh, so somebody's codependent or somebody's crossing boundaries. Well, we don't understand. Like, well, why are we even doing that?
Yeah. Because you have to be open. The attitude of the heart has to be open to reconciliation. But if the person is pushed you past your limits and they are not willing, then you have to accept those changes. Because even like, I think can I quote a scripture that if someone offends you, you go and you talk to them about the offense. If they don't listen, then you bring a witness and witness that offense together. And they don't listen, you bring it to the elders, and if they still don't listen, then you consider them. I'm done. Unfortunately, sometimes those things do happen like that. But yes, we don't want to build walls either.
Looks like we're out of time.
Yeah, out of time.
Sorry for those that have asked questions, during the broadcast. Some people are asking why we're ignoring those questions. We really don't want to ignore those questions, but we had several questions that were submitted prior to the broadcast. We didn't even get to those. And the ones that were asked were tied into existing questions that we were already answering. So please don't feel like we were ignoring your questions. So it looks like we're going to have to do, as somebody suggested earlier, that we do probably parts 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and maybe do it topically, because there's just so much to talk about in all of these areas. But they all dovetail, as I think we've discovered today. Like so many of these areas, they really dovetail into one another. I mean, even just the temperament itself, and the nuances of temperament and how it affects how two different people are going to respond to what's going on in their relationship. So we can definitely have lots more of these. Hopefully, send us some comments on Instagram or wherever else you can put a comment, and leave a comment. Did you enjoy this? I really did. I certainly did. Thank you, Damalie. You just, as always, just like dropping bombs like all over the place.
Yeah, we're getting a lot of love in the chat. People are blowing up for you, Damalie.
Thank you for having me. I know these are very exhaustive things, but sometimes your own journey becomes your life experiences, and your journey is a story to tell. So even as we all go through our own journeys, and people who are dealing with these things, you write your own story. Everything that is happening in your life has a purpose, and there is a reason to it. So examine your life and start writing your story, and see what that says. So
yeah, you just got to go in and mine that out, and the way you do that is to do the work. Like we always say, just do the work. If you do it, you're going to be blessed, because it's going to give you the flip side of all of this anguish and pain that comes from all of these things. There's always redemption on the other side, especially if you allow God into your life, and in terms of like allowing that healing to happen in our hearts, and not just continue to deflect and protect and do all these things, and build that wall, essentially. So once again, the book of the week is The Breaking Free from the Codependency Trap, by the Weinholz. Great stuff. These are heavy duty textbooks, so prepare yourself for some heavy reading, small print, lots of reading, but really excellent work. And then the flip side of that is The Flight from Intimacy, the sister to codependency, which is counterdependency, which is I don't need anybody. I'm fine. Thank you very much.
And you're getting love in the chat, Bill, about your recommendation for Rabbi's Heartbeat. So that could be one you throw out there.
Yay! Well, that's a staple. Everybody's got to get that one. And then there's this book here called The Process. If you haven't got this really shameless plug, yes. This outlines the process that we talk about all the time on EAS. That really all these facets that we've talked about today are really addressed in that. And working on that second book coming out hopefully in the fall, the guided journal and devotional. I'm so excited about that. Looking forward to that getting finished up and getting out, so you can have a companion to the process along the way. So excited. And Damalie, we're looking forward to your first book, which you probably haven't started writing yet. I need you to do that.
I know. It will happen sometime soon. So keep on waiting. It will be up there soon.
All right.
Yes.
Well, thank you, everyone. And we look forward to next week. I can't tell you who it is, but next week we have a corporate CEO coming on. And I'm real excited about that, to hear about how the process has trickled into this business world outside of our normal circles into another business, and how this man's life has been impacted dramatically. And it's trickling into every facet of his life. So we're real excited about that. So we're looking forward to that. And we will see you all next time.
Yeah. Bye,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Bye. EIS out, Bill.
EIS out. Thank you.